Okay, good start. Our OO here. Oh, Matt's here. Thumbs up. Cool. OO. Yeah. CG. Yeah. CO. Cool. If you forget that Zoom has you all over my screen. But yeah, cool. Thank you, friends, for arriving on time. My name is Lucy. I will be your chair for this round. If you wish to refer to me at all during your speeches, please do so as she. Would my panel like to introduce themselves, please? In order they appear on top, presumably, or whatever. So is Arda here? I can't see Arda.
Yeah, so one person dropped. They asked me to replace them. Maybe it's that person. Hi, I'm Robert.
Okay, let's assume that's the case for now. Good to know. Is Emma here?
Yeah, hi, I'm Emma.
Any pronouns or preference or anything?
Oh, yeah, sorry, she, her pronouns, please.
Fantastic.
Jack, here, they thanking you. Best of luck.
Leauren, they damn exclusively. Congratulations, best of luck.
Woo, we got through the panel. Cool. Let's go around the teams. Let me know who's speaking first and your preferred pronouns if you wish to do so. Opening government.
Matt speaking first, he or they. And second, no preference.
Thank you. Opening up.
Nico White speaking first. Nico speaking second, no preference.
Cool. CG.
Jack first, no preference.
Martha second, she, her, please.
Thank you. And CO. Yeah, Martha will go first.
Yossi second.
Martha, you sound so happy about going first. Cool. I will put 1, 6, and 7 into the chat to indicate protected time. Please do time yourselves and indeed the people you would like to offer POIs to. With that, I think everybody consented to streaming. If you don't, maybe say before your speech. If not, or if nothing else, I welcome the Prime Minister to open the debate. Here.
Great. Can I confirm I'm clearly audible? I've been having some internet issues. I think they're fixed now and I should be clear, but if not.
You sound clear. Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Starting in 3, 2, 1. I'm going to be talking about 3 things in opening government. First, framing on how the structural incentives of media companies mean that these trials will be covered badly in the absence of a ban. Secondly, why this changes high-profile celebrity trial dynamics at every stage of the process in a negative way. And thirdly, why this principally violates the right to due process, which celebrities have like every other person. What is our model? We think that this ban would look like extending what is the equivalent of a gag order to cover all aspects of the trial in progress. That is, people will know there's a trial, obviously, and a court case, but nothing beyond. This is something which already happens in high-profile court cases, like ones that involve terrorists, or in civil cases like in divorce courts where the names of children can't be reported on per UK law. What we'll do is we'll ban observers and reporters from this real-time reporting and dissemination of this information of what happens within the courtroom, and the punishment for leaking these kinds of things, if you like reach the courtroom premises, will be a fine the first time, but for repeat offenders, we're happy to scale that up if people want to do that. First claim, why will the media cover celebrity trials that are high profile really badly due to the high profile nature of the people involved, their incredible name recognition, the fact that they operate as public figures, and so on and so forth? The simple reason is because of a bias towards sensationalism that exists at every point in media coverage, but there are 4 structural reasons I want to outline. Firstly, media bias is towards sensationalism because sensationalism generates clicks. Clicks generate ad revenue, which allows them to make more money. More money leads to media outlets having an incentive to cover these things in a sensationalized way. This looks like selective demonization of certain participants of the trial by picking out selective parts of testimony that make people look bad to generate clicks on this. This looks like the active proliferation of some degree of misinformation. This looks like a race to the bottom in terms of poorer news outlets that aren't high profile and have a lot of credibility to publish the most radical, shocking, and sensationalist stuff, which is the BuzzFeed model of journalism that dominates a lot of internet journalism today. Secondly, you have an incentive to seek out relatively low impact but very high profile cases. The actual truth is that the Depp versus Heard trial will likely not bankrupt either figure. It will cost them a significant amount of money, but it is relatively low impact in terms of like no one was murdered here. But because they're high profile and above high profile people, they can use that celebrity name recognition to generate far more attention. So they seek that out and they amplify that coverage to the max, often to the detriment of more important issues. But thirdly, media is also highly political because they can capture specific constituencies and then generate ad revenue on that. This is why Breitbart News is highly right-wing, for example, while other news like Vox is more left-wing in the United States and UK. This means that they will, if they seize on a specific celebrity thing that they can attach to a political cause, they'll use that in order to generate more revenue. So if they can associate a trial with like a high-profile social movement like Depp versus Heard and Me Too, they'll do this in order to polarize their base place. Therefore, this has an active incentive to paint these things in a highly polarizing and toxic manner. Finally, these media outlets just genuinely want to make money. Talking about celebrities is something that gets people to view those kinds of things. The more salacious, the more crazy, the more likely it is that they generate attention. All of this means that media coverage of the trial is likely to be poor, but secondly, it won't adhere to journalistic standards. And thirdly, even when some media outlets cover it well, there is always an incentive to cover it poorly and amplify stories that maybe otherwise might not be better off in the public eye. But even if you don't believe any of that, why does just the process and the nature of not having this ban change trial dynamics for the worse? The central thesis of our claim is that, like other high-profile trials, like cases involving really acrimonious divorces or cases that involve high-profile terrorist figures, sometimes the public having information does more harm than good. And I want to explain what is unique about the ongoing coverage of this trial, as opposed to just regular reporting of outcomes once it's over. Firstly, you have a consistency reporting in the news cycle. It sticks around, meaning it doesn't just fade out of the news cycle after one 24-hour news cycle. When you have a high-profile trial, every time there's a new witness that gets called to the stand, there are new articles written about it at every point. Secondly, the visual and auditory nature of the ongoing trial captures people's curiosity and gets them hooked psychologically. This is why we've been all paying significant amounts of attention to the ongoing trial and why this motion was set, because it's topical. Thirdly, you get a formation of parasocial relationships. Celebrities are particularly high-profile individuals, and because they are particularly high-profile, it's very easy to see yourself in them and attach a certain degree of understanding to them and believe that you are incredibly intimately connected with them to a greater degree. For all of these reasons, there is a significant amount of attachment that forms that we get rid of on our side of the house. What happens? Firstly, you change the lawyers' incentives. It creates pressure on lawyers when they know their media decisions will be scrutinized in real time. This means they're more likely to grandstand, and prosecutors in the defense are more likely to alter their behavior. That is, the defense might try, rather than to actually secure a victory for their client, know they're being televised and want to make passionate speeches in order to embolden their legal careers. And prosecutors might want to do the same rather than convicting. But it also puts pressure on defense attorneys defending politically unpopular individuals like high-profile celebrities who are controversial like Amber Heard to change their behavior. Maybe they won't try as hard because they're afraid of negative media coverage affecting their career later on. So they might change their strategy in such a way that, and because they know the way they behave will be reported on. Secondly, we just reduce harassment to a massive extent. Op will try to mitigate this and say harassment happens on either side. But note the framing I gave you as to why this high profile and saliency of this issue stays in the media far more. You get far less internet harassment of these people because there's far less visual and auditory cues for these people to seize onto and demonize people like Amber Heard, like Johnny Depp. Thirdly, you change the degree to which witnesses are willing to come forward at the point at which the case is high profile and lots of people can see, hear, and access every moment of it because you're afraid to go against a narrative that a public has formed about this thing and you don't want to be exposed to media coverage yourself. We get better justice by preemptively weeding out the kinds of people who would be afraid to testify. We can give these people ability to testify with far greater anonymity and far less ability for their identities to be leaked to the press and things like this. Fourthly, this influences the selection of the jury in a negative way. This is especially true in these really high-profile celebrity cases. It's very hard to find unbiased jurors in the first place, or jurors with a history of wasting opinions on these kind of issues in the first place. After the selection, though, regardless if you pick, it makes it significantly more likely that jurors are aware they'll come under media scrutiny, reporters will try to identify them, and they're more likely to have preemptive bias and change their verdict in accordance with the popular opinion. This abrogates the degree which justice happens to a significant extent. Fifthly, you're just more likely to inflame members of the public because they can point to specific outcomes and specific biases in the procedural outcomes of the trial that creates more polarization, more hostility, and more arguments within the home and things like this. Finally, insofar as there's more reporting on the trial, people's confirmation has far more bias, has far more time to accrue, which means they develop far more entrenched opinions about these kinds of things, makes it harder to shake. See how.
Matt, could you please explain to me why this is not fundamentally symmetric at the point where most people are still going to be consuming shitty television if they don't want to consume high quality television?
Yeah, because it's way less harassment, way less hostility, and way more fair procedural justice for the people involved. See all the mechanisms I gave. Second extension, why does this change legal procedure? Op is going to say accountability. Ahmed will give you a bunch of reasons why public pressure will likely be misinformed, given that the media has an incentive to manipulate the public. The public often lacks information. Members of the public tend to be way less progressive than the average individual and don't necessarily have kinds of views that are likely to accord with actual justice in many of these kinds of instances. So it's likely that this public pressure won't materialize in a positive way. But what happens in terms of positive benefits? Firstly, we just save a ton of money because jury sequestration is no longer an issue because now reporters can't enter the courtroom and identify the jurors in the first place. So there's way less court clog and we free up spaces in that regard. Secondly, you make it far easier for judges to make potentially controversial rulings. You have more adherence to justice on these kinds of things. They're less afraid of public backlash and pressure. Thirdly, you allow a period of time to happen for tensions to cool post-verdict, which is probably really good in terms of ameliorating potential harms that arise from these kinds of things, which we think is quite good. Ahmed will have to detail why people have a right to due process and this contravenes that on a principled level. But in terms of the practical outcomes, that is achieving justice for people under the political system, of which celebrities are no barrier to these things, I'm incredibly proud to stand in open government.
I would like to thank the speaker for that fine speech, and I welcome the leader of opposition. You're here.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I would just like to take note before my speech on the beautiful backgrounds of some of the participants in this competition. It seems like something very exciting is about to happen, and I would definitely want to be a part of it. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Panel, note that these proceedings and these particular places, we're not only talking about celebrity versus celebrity. Every trial that includes a big celebrity opinion is one that it could be one of the celebrities. I would argue just on point of probability, most of these cases are actually the victims. But what's most important to say is that once you ban one, you ban both of the cases. So if we prove to you that in the other cases where it's a random person versus a celebrity, how they're going to benefit, we believe that we win the debate on this. I'll do a couple of things of my speech. I will explain to you why do we believe that there's going to be a just process, and actually believe that when it's publicized, it's going to be more just on our side of the house. Then I'm going to talk about why we believe that actually the victims in many of the cases who are not celebrities get better representation in our house. I'm going to talk about how actually victims are able to get better pre-trial deals in many of the cases, which actually benefits them. And thirdly, I'm going to flip the argument on OG about how exactly this is going to play out in the media. Because look, they put a gag order, but it's still a public trial. People will still know that a trial is going on. They will just not have the details. And also the probability of this leaking that there is at least some trial is so huge, you cannot really completely disregard that. Now, a couple of points of rebuttal towards OG. I think that essentially, in terms of like the impacts of the celebrity, we have to understand that celebrities have, in many cases, consented to be in the public eye. They're used to it. People have shit on them for many other reasons. So the impact on them is not as big. I think also they have millions for PR teams that are actually able to support them to influence the public eye. I think that thirdly, in many of the cases, there's always like other parts of the people that are actually likely to support them. Now, moving on to my analysis. Let's firstly talk about judges. I think that in these cases, what is likely to become is that you're going to set a high-profile judge, somebody who has judged mafiosos, who has judged maybe the O.J. Simpson case, somebody who is very keen on the public eye and who is able to handle that particular pressure and is able to kind of also call out lawyers or prosecutors if they're acting out in court just because of the cameras, which is something very important. You have to understand that the judge is extremely important figure because he controls the trials. He can allow advocates to go to a particular line, or he can disallow something. He can also say to the jury to disregard a particular part of a statement. So that particular figure is very, very big. Now, why do they have good incentives? First of all, they make pretty good money. They're not as corruptible. They have a very long career. They care about their authority. They want to leave a legacy. They want to be essentially regarded as a good judge. There's also always the ability of appealing that case. So if you make a bad decision and it gets appealed and gets overruled in another court, that is very likely for you to look as a worse judge. So you're not likely to make very radical calls that are essentially the bad calls, because at the end of the day, if somebody is guilty, we believe that they should be guilty. Now, for juries are only in criminal trials in most countries. So most of the trials are not in this case. But let's say that we actually have juries. First of all, they're in complete 24/7 isolation. They don't get all of these effects. Also, like, nobody can really predict how particular news cycles affect these juries, even if they see them. Like Amber versus Johnny Depp is no way over at this point. And like, just because right now public opinion thinks that Johnny Depp has won, doesn't mean that that's how these people feel, because they're the ones who are experiencing all of the information, they're seeing all of these things, and they have a much better perception. I would argue that in many of the cases, exactly because people see how a particular party has won in a court of public opinion, they're likely to sympathize sympathize with them and actually work for them. So this is a known point in terms of the jury. I think there's also obviously more scrutiny on these people, and they do have some perceptions as to actually wanted to make the good decisions because they have to live with that. There's also the incentive of the court to actually enforce this the correct way, because look, these trials shape the opinion of the public about the court systems. So you have all of the incentives to look fair, to look good, and to make sure that everything runs smoothly. And in many of the cases, if you make the bad decision just because it's the right political one, you're going to be extremely called out, and you're going to create a narrative against yourself that you're a bad government who is actually not caring about his people. So you have the incentive to make sure that everything that everything is right and to uphold that particular systems. I think that's before I continue, I'm gonna take closing.
So surely there's pre-trial coverage and post-trial coverage, and the vast majority of perception analysis in OO and OG probably materialize in either side to a marginal extent.
Yeah, I mean, sure, that's not our case. Our case is the following. I think that first of the case, in terms of better representation, many of these victims don't really have the money. And it's very hard to win a trial against somebody who has all of the lawyers, all of the PR teams, all of the things on their side. So this is actually a very big plus that is going to be, because if the public is trial, now you know, if you take up this case, you're going to be extremely good in the public eye. You're going to rise up, and you're going to basically show yourself. This incentivizes very good lawyers and very big firms to actually use this and to defend victims who don't have the money to get them in the first place. This is extremely important. I think that the other crucial point of this debate is that when we have the gag order and media attention is actually controlled only by the people, this is even more bad, because speculation is going to occur everywhere. People are going to shape their opinions, and that's far more worse, especially for the victims, because in many of the cases, the fans of this particular person are going to co-opt the conversation and kind of shape the whole conversation about what is supposedly going in this trial. And once this trial is over, the damage will already be done towards this victim. What is even more problematic, because of this, victims will be deterred to go to trial in the first place and take bad offers or no offers at all, because they understand now that they're going to be completely scrutinized on our side. On our side, at least these victims are now able to get that better representation and actually have the ability to win the case over. So we're very happy to oppose.
I would like to thank the speaker for that fine speech, and I welcome the Deputy Prime Minister. You're here.
Am I audible?
You are.
Great. Okay. For POIs, please put them in the chat. Don't verbally interrupt. I'll let you know when I'm ready to take a POI. Great. Okay. If I get inaudible, please let me know. Great. 3, 2, 1. I'm just going to take opening opposition out very quickly so I can run the fun due process stuff that I told Matt I was going to say in prep. Note, Nikki flags that victims are supposedly better on their side. Here's why that's just really just not true. One, victims are more willing to sue in the first place on our side and get justice, because when you're afraid your reputation will be dragged through the mud as a victim, probably never engage in lawsuits in the first place. You get way more likelihood of people coming forward, and that's massively good. But even at the point in which they do come forward, the other witnesses that they otherwise need to build a proper solid case themselves won't come out for you if they, for example, have more of a risk, and their cost-benefit calculus is, if I come out to support my friend, I'm going to be dragged through the mud in the public continuously for long periods of time in the media. And note like the comparative, right? On either side, we agree there are pressures and there are like power asymmetries. The question is the degree to which it amplifies it when the media continuously reports on it. Secondarily, you also get better pretrial settlements on our side for victims. Why? One, when one celeb has a far bigger audience, they can put pressure on the victim to settle because they can say every single detail about our relationship will be leaked to the press. Your name will be ruined by my fans and dragged through the mud even if you win. And victims know this, so they settle for less. On our side, they can fight it for better. But also, if they want to settle, they can settle on better terms because now the dominant person can threaten to leak details of the suit to the press before the trial commences, which means the settlement is probably happens at greater parity. Thirdly, Nikki says that judges have an incentive to make good decisions because they're worried about their career. One, I think counterly, they have a fear of being harassed on the streets, actually. Secondarily, they have the fear that if they don't make a decision in accordance with the public, they worry about things like online threats or doxing, etc. And also this just perverts justice massively. Nikki then says maybe there's public accountability to rectify a lot of these issues. Here's why it won't materialize. One, public pressure is likely to be misinformed, so the source of accountability you want isn't likely to actually be rooted in justice or doing what is right. One, because of the incentive of the media to manipulate the public that Matt already told you, which I don't have to repeat, but secondarily, that the public lacks important information to make an informed decision on the kinds of pressure they would put to create that accountability. Because one, there's not enough time to read all the facts and evidence of the case, and secondarily, they don't understand the law well enough to decide if the person is actually guilty or not for committing the thing that they are accused of. Secondarily, public pressure tends to be less progressive than just like the jury's looking at the facts of the case, insofar there's things like racist biases or an anti-criminal narrative, for example, that seeps in. The reason why judges or juries are comparatively better is that in the courtroom setting, they look at the issues in terms of the law and only the law. So yes, biases exist, but the structure of a courtroom is built and the infrastructure is designed to eliminate as many of these biases as possible. So the only decision makers within that room are ones that are structured to try to be as objective towards the law as possible. Let's take them at their best. Even if you have more accountability, this is principally unjust because you give more preferential treatment to one individual in a trial than other trials. That is to say, if Op says the judge maybe wants to look extra good and careful, or the defense and prosecution care even more about this case, that is principally unjust because the law is asymmetrically applied and one person is getting a better trial simply because it is being reported more as opposed to the actual facets of that case. And justice is asymmetrically applied and people are not getting their due deserts that they've paid into. A few principles then. Firstly, the principle of innocence until proven guilty. Why does this principle matter? Because might say, they have PR team and consented to taking shit from the public. One, I think no, they don't. They consented to being celebrities, not having their reputation dragged through the mud. But secondarily, they have an inherent right to get a fair trial, insofar as the law doesn't say we will give you 10 more years in prison because you have like $10 million more dollars. The whole point is we recognize equal value of each individual. The way public television violates this innocence until proven guilty because it makes it hard for the public to separate an accuser from someone who actually did something, and which is the point of a courtroom trial to otherwise begin with, to discover what actually happened and to provide due process. But secondarily, it's easy for the media to warp them as more likely than not being guilty by selectively picking out parts of the case and testimony to paint them as the villain or maybe a lying victim. The point is we don't know either side, but the point is it gets warped substantially more on their side. Now, this leads to substantially worse trials and due process. What do I mean by worse trials? One, there's less consistency between the same crimes because it's dependent on different public pressures in different constituencies. I say the law ought to be applied equally. Secondarily, there's less information provided in the trial. And thirdly, that there's more bias in the decision-making process. That is to say, the decision of guilt and innocence ought to be made only with the facts of the case at hand, not outside public pressures that have nothing to do with the location, evidence, or the crime itself. The framing for this is that due process is the only measure of justice in the court system. Objective justice is not possible insofar as there's never absolute information to determine culpability. You don't know their motivations for certain. You don't know all the influences that led up to someone's life in this moment. Unless there's a video, there's no absolutely way to tell if anybody did anything in the world. That is to say, there's no absolute truth, moral truth in deciding what is right or is wrong. What justice is possible in this world then? Providing a fair and just process, making sure everybody has the ability to defend themselves, presuming that everyone is innocent first, and applying the law and process equally amongst everyone. Given that, we provide a more predictable, consistent, and applied more equally in the absence of public bias and pressure. Because one, the lack of privacy on their side negatively affects witness testimony, which leads to less information coming out about the actual facts of the case and what someone did. They don't come out with all the information necessary to the case, but even if they come out, they tailor that information to appease to the public watching. That is to say, if you saw somebody did something, but you were, for example, at the strip club and you saw them do it, you can't say I was at the strip club and I saw them do it, because I'm afraid of how the public is going to perceive me for being at the strip club, which means that you mitigate the amount of information necessary to determine if someone's rights were violated or not. Secondarily, public viewing means you negatively affects jurors and create more bias. I don't have to repeat the mechanisms at all of what Matt gave you. But thirdly, you negatively affects judges' decisions in terms of sentencing or allowing particular objections, because now they tailor their decision to, at least to a modicum degree, to tailor to the general public. For explaining more why, Sio, quick.
Could you explain to me why you're not just banning reporting on all trials? Because every single piece of your principled argument could be applied to any trial that's being reported on.
our principle would also apply to any ongoing coverage of a trial. People are allowed to know a trial exists, but you are not allowed to be biased within that and allow asymmetric reporting of that trial that allows the public information to actually determine it. This is specifically why we have juries of the public, and we don't make the public themselves decide the vote via like a referendum of whether someone is guilty or innocent or not. Next, why is the framing of due process or like a fair trial that is not subsumed by the public so important? Because of the social contract and consent. That is to say, we have an obligation to follow laws contingent on us consenting and choosing into them. Real consent and choice requires full information that is minimized at the point in which you disincentivize potential witnesses from coming out to actually or minimize the way in which they tailor their testimonies. The upshot is that the process for justice becomes unclear, inconsistent, and unpredictable when public pressure influences that outcome. But secondarily, real choice, consent into the system requires autonomy. Your consent isn't real if you don't have control in that decision. Your obligation to follow laws comes from the capacity to vote for politicians who create these laws. You indirectly elect things like judges or like the jury selection system. You don't elect the public that then their own biases get to decide that court case for you. So you have no autonomy over that decision. Due process is the only justice framework that exists.
I would like to thank the speaker for that fine speech, and I welcome the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
Okay, you can hear me loud and clear?
Yep.
Glorious. I'll do extensive rebuttal for the next 3 minutes until there's nothing left of the opening government case, and then we're going to move on to further extension. Let's start with the first thing they say. Look, media has bias towards treating sensationalism. First of all, and I think this is really, really important to understand. The motion says this will ban media coverage. The motion does not say we will make these trials private. This means that for the majority of cases, because like law and just the very basics of accountability and how things should do, these trials are open. Therefore, I can go and sit on the bench as long as there's enough seats. I can go then and type on Reddit every single thing I've seen, and this is not something that this particular motion stops me. Therefore, the most highly supportive of fans, especially in the cases when this is highly in the interest of celebrities, are going to be spreading this information through the exact lens they're doing. Therefore, the type of yellow coverage that they're fearing the most is highly symmetric on both sides. Second thing, which I think is really important. Yes, media organizations care about money and sensation to some extent, but I need to have to balance this against a couple of things. First of all, guess what? They can be sued for defamation, especially if they're portraying things in horrible ways. This is often the most major threat for them, which is why they stay away for sensationalism if they're high-profile media organizations like CNN, Fox News, etc. These are people with huge. The second which I think is really important is if you're portraying something in an obviously biased way, and then guess what the court rules in the other way, this can result to massive discreditation of you as a news agency. Therefore, you're strongly incentivized to preserve journalistic integrity. Third of all, you can have significant public backlash depending on the way you're presenting. If this is if you're being heavily biased or if you're being heavily sensationalist, there's significantly larger risk of you receiving this. Therefore, you have. In terms of media representation, it's significantly better than what you like to get in the parallel world, which is only the most radical supporters of a specific celebrity publicizing this and getting a concentrated degree of harassment without any degree of public, of general social checkback. Second thing, which I think it is important to understand, celebrities can vary in terms of how popular they are and what percentage of the population they sway. Most celebrities are fairly local, which means the type of harassment you can get is still fairly sharp. But guess what? Not everybody knows who a random Chalga singer in Bulgaria is, even though she would qualify as a celebrity. This means type of equation of who can witness this trial and who has access to it, and therefore what kind of support will have public reaction you have is very, very different based on the scale of the trial. This is really important, just largely washes up the whole idea of but the fans are gonna exert harassment. I think the likelihood of people standing up against it because fuck Johnny Depp or fuck Amber Heard or whatever, people like to be contrarian somehow, is equally as likely as people who are supportive of these people going out and harassing judges. So this is highly symmetric. But I think then the next thing that's really, really important, right? Just again, I think majority of companies, but also journalists want to maintain integrity because this is something they hold at high regard with themselves. This is how they perceive themselves. I'm writing that's something that is correct, not I'm writing just yellow chart for the masses. So most people try to preserve this. Second thing, which is really, really important, the amplification of coverage. Guess what? significantly fewer people would have turned up in the Jeffrey Epstein trials if the Jeffrey Epstein trials had not stuck up for months and months and months. When something enters like the public presence, this is when people, especially not only when it enters, when it sticks around. You see, this is not just a flare, and they will shrug it off easily. When this is something that predominates the meta, is when significantly more victims, especially of serial abuses, which are the worst types of abuses, are likely to rise up. And this is important, right? Because yes, and I'm going to talk about witnesses, etc. Because here's the thing: celebrities have unique degree of coercive power in the status quo to do abysmal shit and often establish like cultures of abuse. It is only through bringing out those high-profile cases of systematic abuse that actual societal change happens. This is why Me Too gained massive degree of inertia thanks to the trial of Jeffrey Epstein. This is why we learned about the tens of kids that have likely been abused by this. This is why we had a significant social reaction. This is not something you would have had if the case was just largely kept under covers. This is not something we would have if it was continuously hidden from the eyes of the majority of people. Media is what gave this trial the impact it has. Moving on to the next thing. What did they say? Aha, but look, lawyers are gonna grandstand, yada yada. Lawyers are first of all going to be held as based on the way clients choose a lawyer is based on their efficiency. This means on our side of the house, even if somebody is likely to have a losing trial, a lawyer can still make a killer defense of that and get the massive degree of publicity with making the best out of a shitty situation, which is likely to get them other high profile cases. I think this is much better when you have to compare this against the alternative. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. But second of all, notice that again, when something is perceived by the court system as a very high profile case that will draw a lot of attention, guess what the court system wants? They want to make sure that people have trust in the system, which is why they're extra likely to implement security measures, like make sure that the jury is anonymized, make sure that the judges are protected, make sure that the case is insulated. The incentive of this exists as this is how the judicial system makes sure that people trust in it. Not now. Cool, moving on. Witnesses and how willing somebody is to come forth. I think this is the most important metric within a round. First of all, when you have to make a decision, when you've been wrong or you feel wrong, you have an immediate calculus. Quite often, celebrities have a massive degree of initial negotiation power. You can just say, I have all the lawyers in the world. You're never going to have enough money. You're never going to have enough coverage. This is not something that will ever reach the light of day. So just give up. Don't even attempt this, or I will sue you to death, or I will defame you to death. These are threats that are significantly more palatable when you know that there's no way, or when you know that this is likely going to remain under the shadows, when you know that this is likely to remain hidden from the public eye for the majority of cases. However, on the other side, again, this is a massive opportunity for defenders to step up and be like, I'm going to show how, especially the case is valid, right? Especially the case is legitimate. This is a massive opportunity for people who know I can expand the reputation of my defense agency if I take this specific case, because now everybody will see potential future clients, but also my reputation will be shown in public. This is often likely to be measured based on actual performance, not grandstanding, as potential clients measure performance, not how cool somebody looks. Impacts of this are severalfold. First of all, defense agencies are likely to offer massive degrees of support and background help for victims. Before closing.
So in the vast majority of cases, even if they don't grandstand, the best lawyers are not likely to take these trials. And even then, all of the pre and post trial
but it's significantly more likely. And this is for several reasons. The opportunity you have, especially if you're a mid to high range law firm, to gain massive amounts of money and significantly expand your reputation is colossal when this is public. But again, I think this is really important. When it comes down to the decision, when it comes down to the safety that the potential accuser feels to go out with their story, it is largely about the reassurances they get. A high-profile law firm is very willing to give you everything possible, to make you go out there to make sure. And this also applies for witnesses, right? They're the ones that give you reassurances. They're the ones that say, "I will give you financial compensation as long as you go there." They're the ones that make sure you have a standing case and feel confident. But not only this, and this is the other thing, right? Because you also have coercive pressures in the other direction. A lot of people can be doing accusatory lawsuits against celebrities with a completely bogus case, but just threaten somebody with, "Oh, I'm going to sue you and this will ruin your reputation." This becomes significantly less likely for, false or slap types of cases from people who just want to extort celebrities for money, when there's an actual risk, when you know that the ramification of the score will go back to you. Therefore, you're significantly less likely, if you don't have a real case, to go out in the first place. I think this is principally abhorrent for all these reasons. We're very, very proud to oppose.
I would like to thank the speaker for that fine speech, and I welcome the member of government.
Moля? Мисля, че вече дебата.
Nicola, could you mute? Thank you.
Sorry.
Cheers.
I assume I am audible.
You are now. Yes.
Cool. Starting in three, PRs in the chat, starting in 3, 2, 1. Extension from closing government is simple. This is principally unjustified because your ability to defend yourself in the courtroom is infringed upon and a way against opening government. Framing here, I think the vast majority of opening opposition is symmetric because there are still pre and post-trial interviews and individuals reporting on this. One, they want to present the information for all of the reasons top half give. Two, individuals maybe in the context of settling are likely to be considering settling anyway because there's often externalities such as the wealth that an individual may have upon them and their ability to engage with them. But also I'd posit this happens in the vast majority of minority cases because of the specific incentive to want to have the biggest case when there's 2 celebrities opposed to just 1. Also, I'd posit the distinction between the current trial and the pre and post is the following. 1, there's a focus on the decision specifically in the sense of what the outcome was in reflection to the celebrities, but not necessarily the one that necessarily focuses on the actions of the lawyers or the judges themselves. 1, because after the trial, they're relatively low profile in the context of the decisions that were made. 2, the brand name and specific all the other things focus rather on the celebrities and the decisions that they were made so that the influences and the incentives and the media cycle does not affect them in that context. But rather in the context of the trial, they're the main individual, the ones that making every decision, every single word. The media incentives shift when it is solely the post-trial. I would posit that opening governments say that you are innocent until proven guilty, but never prove why you're not able to prove yourself innocent. That is the extension from closing government. Specifically, why? 3 tiers of analysis. 1, the quality of lawyer is worse, the judge is worse, and the quality of defense is worse. Why is the lawyer worse? Specifically because things like clickbait are likely to have things like clip recordings that necessarily sensationalize every action you make. When you do things like, say, objection, is made to mean that you are kind of an idiot and not understanding the decisions and the aspect of law. 2, the family or individuals you know are interviewed. They're asked about you because you're the main focus of that trial and the decisions and the questions you are asking. 3, you just might be getting abuse every time you go back from work. On Twitter, on your mail, there may be phone calls calling into your law firm saying that you were terrible and you were defending the worst person ever. And that just depends on which celebrity you like more or less. And therefore, individuals are not likely to want to take these trials in the first place. Note this sidesteps OO's analysis and opening governments, because it doesn't matter if they grandstand or not, they just specifically do not go to the trial in the first place. And therefore, the quality of lawyer gets worse initially. 2, the quality of judge is likely to get worse. Opening opposition say that you were just likely to have a high quality lawyer, such as someone who's stood over a mafioso trial. But I would posit the problem with this, and these specific type of lawyers, the most experienced one, are not the ones that want to take this job. Why? Because they've spent their entire career doing low-tier jobs in the like the trials that are not the most publicized. So therefore, have slowly but surely built up their legacy and their legitimacy to their peers and individuals ratifying and believing their decisions. But now when you take a high quality like judge trial, there may be only 1 or 2 you ever do in your entire career because there's often multiple different districts, multiple different countries, or just multiple different individuals that may do it. It's not likely that you've much experience in that. What that means, therefore, is the individuals who do have the experience, the best ones, do not want to risk their legacy or be tarnished by those types of abuse. So therefore opt out and do not want to select themselves into that trial. Therefore, you get the least experienced judge, the one who wants to possibly make a name for themselves. But the problem with this is they don't have a legacy or the relevant experience. So the judge is likely to be often relatively shit or not relatively qualified at that. Therefore, the quality of a lawyer and judge making that decision is likely to be bad. And the quality doesn't even necessarily, like, it matters, but also I'd posit it just means that you're not equal under the law. Either individuals, if you were the average person, wouldn't be treated in this specific way. But I'll weigh that later. The third thing is the quality of defense gets worse. Why? Firstly, celebrities, i.e. the individuals that are the plaintiff or the defendant, are likely specifically to be hesitant to present information about themselves because they may be risk averse that they will lose this trial and therefore do not want specifically to give too much information, to be characterized as a lawyer or someone that was particularly bad. Secondarily, they often may read articles during the trial because they may be insecure about how individuals perceive them. So therefore, they'll see all of the abuse online and then justify how they talk about themselves or adjust that accordingly. And therefore, the types of information and the degree of evidence you get is inherently constrained. Secondly, the lawyers themselves are likely to only take cases they believe can succeed, which means that even where there may be one case that is obvious that individuals believe that it can concede, that means that one side gets an asymmetric benefit in the form of that law system, and therefore it is unfair. But also thirdly, I would posit the experts are likely to follow a similar incentive analysis. That is that you're likely to get the worst experts if you believe that you are not as guilty or that those individuals are sensationalized, but also I posit occurs on both sides for experts for similar reasons that I have lawyers. I posit the reason these individuals are necessary is one, it allows you for the best possible opportunity to defend yourself, and two, it prevents worse information, i.e. reduces the equality or ability to defend yourself. Before I go on closing.
Right. Could you just please explain to me why the reporting makes it so terrible? And if that is the case, why we don't just ban all reporting on all trials?
I'm happy to stand over that. It's principally consistent. Therefore, weighing and justification for this principle. One, the right to a fair trial or its self-defense. Why do you have a right to self-defense? When you have a right to defend yourself, specifically in the context against the state and specifically the asymmetric power over it. That is, your only recourse is going through the court or through the justice system, and inherently this a constraint on your ability to actually choose what is a good lawyer or a good person, because the amount of individuals operating or willing to offer their services to you is inherently constrained and therefore less plausible. Two, there's an immediate threat to your ability to function. That is that you may have a reputational damage, mental health harm, or just the ability to be thrown in jail in the context of criminal court trials, meaning that individual is specifically not able to consent, and therefore the only way in which they can be able to defend themselves is the ability to access any lawyer they want. Two, equality. That is that individual, specifically equality of action in the decision. That is, in front of the court system, you should have the ability to be treated as if you were the average person. That is, you shouldn't be treated differently because of who you are or your status. And what that means is, if I'm Jack and I go into a law system, that means I probably can hire any lawyer, because I'd be like, equal chance of that succeeding. But I'm like Johnny Depp or Amber Heard, it's like, these individuals are different, so the lawyers and their calculus inherently changes, but specifically because of the fact it's highly reported. But in the context in which that isn't reported, then those incentives can change, and it is less of a principle violation. Why is justice important, therefore? Two reasons. One, it adjudicates between the rights and wrongs of individuals, and given that each individual is an equal moral actor within the context of a law, the only way in which you can adjudicate or come to a right decision is giving individuals the ability to access the best opportunity that they have. Yes, poor people may not be able to access the best lawyers, but unfortunately that is just a constraint of who they are in society. But rich individuals, if they have the opportunity, should be given this possibility, especially where it's an equal footing. But two, it is the premise of the state. That is that other actions that the state take is illegitimate, specifically in the context of it does not fulfill its base burden of security, i.e. the reason we are not in a state of nature, that a base level the state will protect us from acts of violence and the fact that we will be murdered, meaning that this is a degradation of that burden. For all of those reasons, closing government.
Well, I thank the speaker for that fine speech, and I welcome the member of Parliament. Hear, hear. Sure. Hope you can hear me. Yep. Okay, I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Look, if I was judging this debate, I think I would have a pretty hard time. And I think I would have a pretty hard time, mostly because I honestly don't think it is very clear which side will have easier or better trial, right? Because I think intuitively, sometimes opening opposition is going to be correct, right? Sometimes this is going to push trials to be more professional, to be better, and sometimes the additional media scrutiny basically makes it extremely hard for victims. But then again, sometimes opening and closing government to that extent are going to be correct, that sometimes this is an unjust push for justice, and then sometimes this does cue the whole process in a very bad way. Sometimes lawyers grandstand, and this is something which is huge of an issue. That's why I don't think you should basically judge a debate on this, because the outcome of the trial is something which is highly dependent on multiple factors. And I think the media attention is just one of them, and it's very hard to point out, was this the primary or the secondary, at least, reason why a specific outcome of a trial was given, right? I think the outcome of a trial depends on many factors. Who is the judge? What is the case? Who is the celebrity? Who are the lawyers? And who is the prosecutor, right? I think all of these things are very complex, and boiling the outcome of a very complex trial only to was media present or was not media present is extremely simplistic. And I don't think you, as a very experienced panel, should basically do this. Before actually going to my arguments, I just want to give brief legal disclaimers to both govs, because it is very obvious they don't know what they're talking about. Firstly, in majority of cases, juries are anonymized, and they can be anonymized exactly because of the issue that both governments basically point out. Lawmakers all around the world know that you can actually pressure juries if we are
basically allowing everyone to know their name, right? Secondly, very often jurors are banned, heavily banned from watching any media during the trial. Very often they basically pushed to be in a fucking hotel. This is what people in the O.J. Simpson trial reported. They were basically stuck in one room for shit ton of days without any cell phone, without any external communication. So I really don't think this is the issue. And also on witnesses, sometimes they can be anonymous and sometimes we don't have to point out their identity, right? And also all lawyers and jurors, look, and judges, look, these are very experienced people. The lawyers who are currently doing the lawyering for Amber Heard are very experienced with celebrity trials. The judge is also as well. This is not their first rodeo, and I honestly don't think additional media scrutiny is that big of an issue for them. That's why I honestly believe this debate should be about something else, which is not the outcome of the trial. And that's what Yossi and I are going to prove. Basically, we're going to prove why reporting on the trial after it has happened would be worse. And secondly, why this is a unique way to actually inform people about how the legal system works and what are the issues in it. Firstly, why media will report on trials basically far worse when the trial is done. Because as I think opening up tries to say, but then they stop, in majority of cases, either the trials will still be public, because very often this is something which was mandated, or very often something which can be done at the request of one party, and we do this basically because we want to secure oversight of justice, so this is non-comparative, or B, the trials will not be public, but everyone will kind of know that the trial has happened, right? Very often this is public information, right? You would know this anyway, right? But unless the motion says ongoing trial, meaning to some extent nothing stops Sun and Daily Mail from reporting on this trial after the fact. What are the implications of this? First, basically they report with much less information, making it far easier for them to skew how the whole process went, right? It makes it far easier for them to interpret for the reader or for the viewer what a specific deposition has actually meant, or what a specific saying by the judge actually meant. Secondly, sensationalist media then is the only one who kind of reports on this, right? Because for a respectable media, it is not very interesting to report a trial after it was being done and after it is not that important. However, Daily Mail and Sun will always have an incentive to report on the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp shit, right? That's why very often, and people will always want to know facts about this, right? I even fucking want to know about Johnny Depp, and I am an intellectual here, right? So to some extent, right, I do believe everyone will want to know this. However, now when you search for information, the only thing which you will actually get is the Sun and Daily Mail stuff, right? Exactly because I don't think BBC will have an incentive to write about this. That is it on a comparative. If this is something which everyone covers, then a respectable media publication also has an incentive to basically cover this, because this is something which is very popular and their viewers actually want to read about it. And this is something which is in the public eye as well. Truly, this is very often people don't know legal intricacies. When people don't know legal intricacies, it's far easier for Daily Mail and Sun to skew what results of the trial actually meant. If Johnny loses, it will be far easier for Daily Mail and Sun to basically point out that Johnny Depp lost exactly because the judge was a woman, or because the judge was progressive and biased for Amber. Listen, today, basically, you have respectable media who very often gives legal explanation, who very often calls legal experts to talk about these issues, to basically discuss them in depth. This is what exactly you are having on. And final issue on this, you threaten and stop people far more, right? Because media like the Sun will always want to know information about who are the witnesses, right? But now basically the information is not easily accessible to them. That's why they will actually go and bother the neighbors, bother the extended family even far more, because this is the information that they want to know now and they cannot get it otherwise. The comparative that you are actually getting is, yes, today you have some sensationalist media. However, number one, that's mitigated by having other respectable media report on this, and B, exactly because you have more information, it's far harder for them to skew the narrative or to pursue it in a very negative way. Second argument, people are far more informed about the justice system and the issues that plague it. Notice that today, and this is very maybe low impact, but I think it makes a tremendous difference. Our perceptions today on how the law system looks like are basically shaped by TV, by media exaggeration, by stereotypes. None of us was actually in a trial ever, or majority of you, right? I was, right? But I do believe like for the majority of people, we have the Suits idea about how the law system looks like. Now, when basically media does the coverage, very often they explain the issue. Very often people Google, like, what the fuck does defamation mean? What is the legal burden here? But note that also people very often see what are the issues in the system. When we had the O.J. Simpson trial, we saw how fucked up our system is in terms of recreational justice. But we also saw how fucked up it is when jury of imperfect people can basically be the only one who is deciding what this. So listen, on a comparative, we don't care about the legal system. This is not something which is sexy. Like, we don't have time to read for this, right? The only way to actually get us interested is if you feed spoon us with a bit of celebrities on that, right? I think the impact is we are more informed. It is far easier for us to decide when should we change the system and when should we not, right? And we are far more in a better position, basically, to decide on these things. I'm very proud to stand in up.
I would like to thank the speaker for that fine speech and remind speakers to try and take a POI during speeches if offered, etc. Yossi's saying he'll take two. With that, I welcome the proposition whip. You're here.
Can I check on my audible?
You are.
Okay, I'll take you probably after the 5th minute, but we'll likely just request one, so please just have one ready. Okay. Getting started then in 3, 2, 1. Let's deal with CO first. We're taking on the other teams to debate. Firstly, on the responses allegedly to GovBench, when they talk about jurors being anonymized and can't watch any media, I would note this takes that opening government, who are contingent on the outcome of the case and the way that jurors might be biased by this particular kind of coverage, but not us, because we talk about the perception of the risk of this coverage and how that changes the trials before they even happen. It changes who your lawyer is, it changes who your judge is, it changes the actual kind of case you could present in the first place, because before the trial even takes place, before any media coverage happens, the perception that it's going to happen changes the incentives of anyone getting involved in the case in the first place. That means the case itself is inherently worse, because you get less experienced judges and lawyers in the first place, because no one who's experienced wants to go anywhere near this. Secondly, there's the assertion that it's lawyers who are very experienced with celebrity trials who are going to do this. I would posit this is untrue, but even because I can counter assert that it is, but even if it is true, individuals who are specifically used to doing celebrity trials are probably going to do it worse, because if it is the case that they are dealing with that, they will be focusing on the court of public opinion as well as the court itself, in that they themselves don't want to screw over their own careers, also don't want to screw over the long-term celebrity well-being. I would also posit that they are only going to opt into it if they think that they can win. This is only going to happen if they are on the good side, i.e. they think they can win, because if they do want to continue being hired by celebrities, and that is the case as CEO claim, then they would only want to be taking the side that is going to win a trial. That still means that the individuals who on face value seem likely to lose the trial don't get access to justice, don't get access to the best lawyer, which means that that is just still worse. Firstly, on media reporting being worse, i.e. you just get the Sun reporting on it. I would note that firstly, the idea that more media aren't going to report on this just proves Jack's framing. That is that now, if you have this ban, there will not be a risk of lawyers' names just being printed in magazines and newspapers constantly. There's not going to be a risk of this happening. Secondly, I think the idea that the Sun is now going to massively cover this is probably unlikely, given that they talk about how it is boring and it's unlikely to be particularly interesting to individuals. I would note the Sun has an incredibly wide variety of cases it can talk about that aren't legal cases. If they want to talk about celebrities, they can take pictures that they've stolen off beaches and boats. They can follow people around and take photos. They can stalk people's childhood friends and ask them to leak stories about the embarrassing thing that they did in high school. All of those are easier to do than try and find out about a case that happened behind closed doors that no one cares about any more than the fact that the celebrity themselves is involved in it, which means I don't think there's any incentive for the Sun to put all of the effort into doing that as opposed to doing any number of other things. Secondly, though, I think they are less likely to go and bother neighbors because they don't know who is involved in the trial in the first place. As Jack tells you, if you don't have the lawyer's name literally being printed, or it's not being constantly reiterated and printed, because even if it is in an article, it's not something people care about if they don't see it constantly. I think it is unimportant to individuals, and they are unlikely to go and seek out the daughter of Johnny Depp's lawyer to try and find out about what she thinks about the case and what her dad thinks, because they don't know who she is, because they don't know and no one cares about who the lawyer is because they haven't watched the lawyer do anything. Okay. So I say the weighing on this is that the security and protection of individuals' right to protect themselves is the state's primary duty, which means that they ought to try and prioritize it through things like this ban, even if it is not going to fully work, which means that even if they're right, and it won't be successful in all cases all the time, it ought to be prioritized because it is the state's primary duty, because it is the only thing that legitimizes the state's infringement on our autonomy through its monopoly on violence. Okay, then to people being more informed of the justice system. One, I would posit this is just unimportant. I don't know why it matters to be informed, because I would say most people don't have the capacity to change change the systems in that they are entrenched, in that they're like rich elites who have more capacity to control these things than anybody else, and in that most people aren't interested enough by their own analysis to do more than read an article in the Sun and move on. Like, I don't think they actually are like, this Johnny Depp trial is so fucked up, let's change the legislation. Most people don't have the time or energy to devote to that kind of campaign and aren't going to do that. Okay, I'll take opening opposition, please.
Look, the only delta here is how much pressure the judiciary system feels to make sure that the quality of this trial is high. It's not about the judge pick, it's about what the judiciary system does with everything else in terms of coverage for witnesses, coverage for lawyers, etc., etc. This is the only delta. The fans are still going to leak this on Twitter.
Okay. Firstly, they won't, because it is asserted by both opposition teams that trials can just like still be open. I would note most of the time they aren't, because at most countries across the world in judicial systems, individuals don't want their names printed in the media anyway. Celebrities choose to open some trials and often do so only if they think they are going to win that trial, or they are forced open because the other side of the debate thinks they're going to. I think the issue here is that trials will... So the trials that particularly opening opposition talks about are never going to be public in the first place. It's not going to be a case that one could just sneak in to the trial of like Selena Gomez assaulted some randomer. Because firstly, if they aren't celebrities the big PR teams that opening opposition talk about, and they believe they are likely to get backlash from fans that would be pro the randomer, anti-Selena Gomez, they will be advised not to open the trial anyway, not to give interviews, not to talk in a certain way within that trial. Even if they are not, I think they're likely to be settled out of court because the individual who's the random doesn't want to be harassed by Selena Gomez's fan base, doesn't want their name and like harassment to happen anyway. I think this means that even if they do happen, the average person risks huge abuse from fans regardless of outcome, but also the average person is then unable to get a good lawyer or a good defense in that particular case because that lawyer doesn't want to get involved either for the reasons Jack tells you. That lawyer is not a person who wants to get their name raked through the mud. They don't want to be called out by the individuals within that state. They don't want the coverage and they don't want the harms that come with that coverage, which means that that person gets a worse trial if it is public than they would if it wasn't public. I would go further though, as I think Jack already weighs, this is a minority of cases because I think that the Sun doesn't care that much about a trial with one celebrity as opposed to it does with a trial with two celebrities, because I think it's significantly less interesting and then like the kind of cases that we actually see in the media that have more celebrity involved within them. I think in these cases also the end product analysis would be just as interesting in that, like, if it is about like Selena Gomez did this one thing, I think the Sun is going to be just as interested in the end product on our side. So like even if it is about like criticizing the celebrity for doing some kind of harm, I think that happens anyway in the post-trial analysis. It just doesn't involve harassing people during the trial. It doesn't involve like taking lawyers, naming them and just talking about all the harms that they're doing, making fun of the things that they say within their trials. I think none of that happens anymore, and that is a benefit that means the coverage is meaningfully different. Okay, I want to weigh against opening government now, because I think all that they say on the due process stuff is contingent on outcomes. They say that like victims are unlikely within the trial to speak in certain ways. They say public pressure around it is bad. They say that judges are going to make different decisions out of fear. But I think the issue is that none of this deals with the fact that before a trial even happens, the risk of perception changes who is willing to engage with this trial in the first place. It's only Jack who tells you the reason why worse judges and worse lawyers are going to get involved, because they are the only ones who are arrogant enough and don't have the experience to know that this is going to be a shitty experience for them and one that could ruin their careers, and that doesn't work out. I mean, that we are firstly logically prior to their analysis, because the things that they talk about are all premised on the trial as it happens and after it happens. We talk about before the trial and why that leads to a trial that is worse and significantly more unfair. But secondly, I think it's incredibly intense harm to the individuals we talk about. They have lawyers who don't think that they can win because they're the only ones they could be left with. They have lawyers who tell them they're unlikely to win. They go off and read cases, like read analysis during the cases that tell them that they look like they're lying. They look like they're not telling the truth. I think that is incredibly intense harm to you that just doesn't happen on the other side. But finally, I think this affects all of the cases that have celebrities in them because the quality of the cases themselves is inherently worse, which isn't touched on by opening government. For all of those reasons, CG.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that fine speech, and I welcome the opposition whip to close the debate. Here.
Just double checking that I'm audible.
You are.
Awesome. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, maybe I'm too ESL to comprehend what the new mechanisms from CG are in terms of why trial lawyers are worse and judges are worse. But to me, it largely sounds like Ahmed's speech, come again in slightly different words, which is why I'll deal with most of this in one go and then separately deal why reporting on our side is actually better and holds significantly greater impacts, weighing that against top half in the process. Before that, just a couple of points of rebuilding and rebuttal. I hear from Martha, not Marta, that people have that before the trial happens, you have this pre-selection process of who wants to even opt into this trial? This is entirely asserted. They claim people are afraid. I'm not sure why lawyers are afraid, especially given that most lawyers think that they are actually quite competent, quite skilled, will probably want to utilize the fact that they now have national coverage as, an advertisement of their skill to potential other clients, meaning it is particularly likely that actually most people will want to opt into this. Additionally, most judges in most systems have, tenure, so they don't need to really be afraid of public backlash. But even in systems where there's election processes, judges will probably want to be in the public eye just in order to be known, because oftentimes, regardless of what your verdicts are on stuff, people just knowing you makes it more likely for them to vote for you, meaning that in either system, people will likely opt into this. This is largely, this is most of the, and then one point of rebuttal we hear is this idea that, important media won't report on this, is what Marta said, which is untrue. Marta said important media won't report on this if this does not become a large news story, and this only becomes a large news story if there's ongoing reporting on it. If there's only an after the fact reporting on it, then the only places that are going to be talking about it are tabloids. Before I continue, opening.
It's not enough to pretend you symmetrized everything. We're not contingent on perfect outcomes of all trials. We simply explain why more information and better trial participation means procedurally trials are more fair. Why is Karen knowing a bit more about law, which she can also learn from watching Suits or another trial, more important than procedural?
Matt, 15 seconds, come on. Look, very clearly, we're not just pretending to symmetrize things, we are symmetrizing things because you are very contingent on what the outcomes of the trials are in order for your impacts to stand. Note, however, more importantly, it's not a minor impact to people are just generally more aware. Let me give you a specific example. When Jan Böhmermann, which is basically Germany's John Oliver, was sued by Erdogan for having committed a lèse-majesté offense, meaning he offended Erdogan by calling him a goat fucker in a poem, there was a public outcry in Germany over the fact that this trial was going on. This was something that Germans were so outraged by that this is still a law, that this law was changed less than 24 hours after this became the news. So just claiming that there's nothing people can do to change the system is all powerful, is just an assertion from both gov teams. Yes, sometimes the process is maybe a bit bizarre and difficult to read, but it is possible and plausible for the public to at least deal with the worst cases of where the law currently isn't functioning. We think that impact is significantly more important than maybe trials are being slightly less fair, which is still not clear to me after 28 minutes of Gov claiming that they will be, because all of Gov's cases in terms of why trials are going to be less fair are structurally speaking just sensationalism bad, because that shit impacts the reporting. Marta gave you 5 separate mechanisms for why trials are highly complex mechanisms that are not contingent on what the current public mood is, regardless of the context. It is on the onus is on government to prove why reporting is specifically the mechanism. Opening government wants to explain it now.
We explained why, whether news outlets are reputable or not, they all have structural incentives to engage in bad news coverage, including drawing attention to low-profile cases that lead to harassment campaigns developing against individuals that would never have happened otherwise. This is true regardless. The coverage
or symmetrical opening already explains this. Even I don't know, Ahmed could have already engaged with this. You guys didn't engage with it. With why people who are strong fans of a celebrity aren't going to just be assholes about it anyways, right? Like, people on the internet are going to be assholes on both sides of the debate. Especially, however, Marta actually explains why they're more likely to be assholes on our side of the debate, because the only thing people hear is the outcome of the trial after the fact, where then they only, without having seen the context, without understanding the nuances of how things come, people then just see Johnny Depp loses case about defamation of being called wife beater, which then led to people for 4 years calling Johnny Depp a wife beater, even though now public sentiment has shifted after people realized this was not actually what happened. What happened was a very technical legal procedure that, without looking at step-by-step outcomes along the way, was actually then misread because people weren't paying attention to the process of the trial at the time. It is only in this current ongoing trial that people actually paid attention, because it got so much publicity. Meaning that actually what publicity does on our side of the house is that it creates significantly greater accountability for everyone involved, meaning it creates greater accountability on the system itself to make sure that they're doing well. It creates greater accountability on the news outlets to make sure that they are not being that they don't get shit on tomorrow as having been wrong, etc., etc. More important, however, that regardless of the outcomes of the trials, and here's where I weigh us against the top half in general, because as Marta has already flagged to you, most of top half is contingent on whether or not the trials are still fair or the trials are not so fair, our impact actually stands regardless of whether or not this has an impact on the trial, because what we explain to you in the most simple terms is that structurally speaking, we generate access to the average citizen in terms of what trial proceedings look like. That means we take, to some extent, we create accountability in terms of how the structures of the systems work, meaning that we actually have people understanding what is going on, how trials operate, and how our system functions, which then allows them, as I already highlighted in my initial rebuttal, it allows opportunities for people to lobby for that system to be changed, for activists to shift how laws are, to change obscure laws, or to change unfair laws, which people need to be aware about, and more importantly, need to be aware about how lawyers and judges do interpret laws, which is only possible if awareness is raised. Notice that closing government proudly stands by making all trials not televised, by taking away reporting on all ongoing trials. We think that reporting on trials is a necessary mechanism, and specifically celebrity trials are the most high-profile ones because but everyone in this debate agrees, these people are interesting, therefore people want to watch, meaning that this mechanism actually amplifies on our side of the debate because these people are interesting, meaning that if all things being equal, with it being highly unclear that judges will just decide things based on, what happens to be the public sentiment, we don't think that's true. Notice probably the most public example of a judge not giving a fuck about what people in the public opinion thought was the trial of the Chicago 7, where the judge clearly decided against them, even though public sentiment was overwhelmingly on the side of the defendants. We are not clear on why public sentiment impacts judges, lawyers, etc. at all. Proud to stand in opposition side.
Cool. Thank you all for that fine debate. I assume conveners can stop streaming the Zoom to YouTube soon, please. Judges, shall we pick a breakout room to go judge in? Let's go into 4 because it's empty. Cool.
Thanks, friends.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.